Tuesday, January 27th, 2026, 4:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The closing bell just rang on Wall Street 13 minutes ago. Donald Trump is on Air Force One somewhere over the Atlantic, returning from what European leaders are calling the most disastrous diplomatic trip in modern American history. And he just sent a tweet. One sentence, 11 words. In the 8 minutes since that tweet posted, $2.3 trillion in market value has evaporated. Not disappeared slowly, not eroded over days, vanished. In 8 minutes. What I am about to show you is not on CNN right now. It is not in the Wall Street Journal. It is not being discussed on any cable news network. Because what happened in those 8 minutes, what is happening right now as global markets freeze in absolute terror, tells you everything you need to know about where this is heading. And it is not where anyone thinks. Subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on notifications, because in the next 20 minutes, I am going to show you 3 documents that the White House does not want you to see. I am going to walk you through the emergency meetings happening behind closed doors at the Federal Reserve, at the Treasury Department, at central banks in 14 countries. And by the end of this breakdown, you will understand why global supply chains just entered what economists are privately calling a death spiral. Hit that subscribe button, because when the first bank fails, you will want to know why before everyone else does. Let me take you back. Not to the tweet, not yet, because that is not where this actually started. 4:34 p.m. Eastern Time, the CEO of Walmart sends an emergency email to the company's chief financial officer. Subject line, emergency inventory hold, effective immediately. The message is 3 sentences long: freeze all purchase orders from 14 countries, cancel in-transit shipments where possible, shift to 30-day inventory buffer across all categories. Walmart just told its suppliers to stop. 13 minutes before markets closed, 13 minutes before Trump sent his tweet. Why would the largest retailer in America do this? Why would they halt billions of dollars in purchases with no public explanation, no press release, no warning to shareholders? Because they knew. At 4:47 p.m., Donald Trump posts from Air Force One, quote, 100% tariffs on all imports from countries refusing dollar settlements. Effective February 15th, no exceptions, no negotiations, America first. 11 words that just rewrote the global economic order. Within 90 seconds after hours trading explodes, the Dow Jones futures drop 847 points. The S&P 500 futures fall 3.2%. Bitcoin, that supposed safe haven, spikes $4,200 as panicked money flees into anything that is not tied to traditional banking. Gold jumps $87 per ounce, and the yuan dollar exchange rate experiences the largest single-day move since 1994. But here is what you need to understand. This was not a negotiation tactic. This was not Trump floating an idea to see how markets would react. This was a declaration, and the language matters enormously. 100% tariffs, not 25% like he threatened Canada, not 60% like he imposed on China in 2018. 100%. That means if a product costs $10 to import, it now costs $20 the instant it crosses the border. It means entire categories of goods become economically impossible to bring into the United States. But the second part, that is where this becomes something we have never seen before. Countries refusing dollar settlements, not countries that trade with China, not countries that violate human rights, countries that refuse to settle their trades in U.S. dollars. Trump just told the world, use our currency or face economic annihilation. And he gave them 18 days to comply, 18 days until February 15th. The markets did not freeze because of the tariffs. Markets freeze when they realize the rules no longer apply, when they understand that the largest economy on earth just threatened to cut off any nation that dares to use an alternative currency. This is not a trade war, this is a currency war. And it just went nuclear. Here is what nobody is talking about. Here is the detail that every news network missed while they were focused on the market meltdown and Trump's all-caps tweets. 3 days before that announcement, January 24th, a memo circulated inside the White House. It was leaked to Reuters 40 minutes ago. Most people will not read it. I did. The document is dated January 24th, 2026, from the Office of the United States Trade Representative to cabinet members and senior White House staff. Subject line, contingency planning, dollar defense mechanism. 4 pages. Dense legal language, but buried on page 3, section 2, subsection C, there is a paragraph that changes everything. Quote, Phase 3 implementation requires immediate coordination with Treasury to freeze correspondent banking access for non-compliant nations. Secondary enforcement mechanisms include swift messaging restrictions and bilateral pressure on allied central banks to deny clearing facilities. Let me translate what that actually means. This is not just about tariffs. Tariffs are what they want you to focus on. The real mechanism is something far more devastating. Correspondent banking is how international trade actually works. If a company in Vietnam wants to sell products to a company in Brazil, neither country's banks talk to each other directly. They go through correspondent banks, almost always American or European institutions that facilitate the transaction. These banks hold accounts in multiple currencies and move money between financial systems. What this memo is describing is cutting off that access, not just for governments, for any bank, any financial institution, any company that helps a non-compliant nation conduct trade. If China refuses to settle trades in dollars and continues using yuan, the United States will not just tariff Chinese goods. It will threaten to cut off any bank that processes Chinese transactions from accessing the American financial system. And since the dollar underpins 70% of global trade, that is a death sentence. No American bank will risk losing access to U.S. markets, which means no international bank will either, which means any country that refuses dollar settlements will be frozen out of the global financial system entirely. This is not economic policy. This is financial warfare. And the correspondent banking threat is the weapon nobody saw coming. Do you understand what this means? Trump is not just taxing imports. He is threatening to collapse the entire infrastructure of global trade for any nation that dares to use a different currency. There are 3 pressure points in the global economy right now, 3 places where this policy does not just create tension, it creates impossible choices. And what happens at these 3 pressure points over the next 18 days will determine whether we are looking at a recession or something far worse. Pressure point number 1, the China trap. China is responsible for 60% of consumer electronics sold in the United States. Your phone, your laptop, your television, your appliances, 60% either manufactured in China or assembled from Chinese components. A 100% tariff does not just double the price. It makes these products economically non-viable for most American consumers. But here is the trap. China also holds $1.1 trillion in United States Treasury bonds. They are the second largest foreign holder of American debt. And for years, the assumption in Washington has been that China would never dump those bonds because it would crash their own holdings. Mutual assured destruction, financial deterrence. That assumption just broke. January 25th. The People's Bank of China sells $47 billion in Treasury bonds, not gradually, in one trading session. January 26th, they sell another $62 billion. And today, January 27th, $89 billion. In 3 days, China has dumped $198 billion in U.S. debt. They are not panicking. They are testing. They are showing the world that they can move this kind of volume without collapsing their own system. And more importantly, they are showing Washington that financial deterrence only works if both sides believe the threat. Here is what happens next. If China continues selling at this pace, U.S. Treasury yields spike. When yields spike, borrowing costs for the American government increase. The national debt becomes more expensive to service, and the Federal Reserve faces an impossible choice. Do they raise interest rates to defend the dollar and choke off the economy, or do they hold rates steady and watch inflation explode as the dollar weakens? China is not trying to win this fight in 18 days. They are positioning themselves for the long war, and what they are preparing for should terrify you. Pressure point number 2, the Europe fracture. At 2 o'clock this morning, Brussels time, the European Union held an emergency council session, not a regularly scheduled meeting, an emergency session called with 4 hours' notice, and the vote was unanimous. The European Union has activated what is called the blocking statute. This is a legal mechanism that was created in 1996 but has never been fully deployed. What it does is protect European companies from U.S. secondary sanctions. It makes it illegal under EU law for European businesses to comply with American extraterritorial penalties. In plain language, if the United States threatens to sanction a German company for trading with China in yuan, the blocking statute allows that German company to ignore the American threat. And more than that, it gives EU member states the legal authority to compensate companies that suffer losses from U.S. sanctions. This is the European Union publicly, formally, unanimously rejecting American financial dominance. And it did not stop with a vote. Within 6 hours, 3 things happened that were not widely reported. Germany announced a €50 billion trade facility with China that bypasses SWIFT entirely. It uses the cross-border interbank payment system, China's alternative to the dollar-dominated messaging network. France signed an oil for yuan agreement with Saudi Arabia, the first time the Saudis have officially agreed to price oil in a currency other than dollars for a major Western economy. And Italy, a G7 nation, a founding member of the European Union, joined CEPS. They are now integrated into China's payment infrastructure. Do you see what is happening here? Trump thinks he is punishing the world for abandoning the dollar. The world is responding by building the escape route faster. The European Central Bank issued a statement 3 hours ago. It was carefully worded, diplomatic, but the message was clear. The ECB is prepared to provide euro liquidity support to any European institution facing dollar funding stress due to geopolitical tensions. Translation: if American banks cut you off, we will keep you alive. This is not a tantrum. This is preparation for a post-dollar world. Pressure point number 3, the supply chain paralysis. Let me give you one example that every American will feel within 90 days. The iPhone. Current retail price for the base model, $999. Under a 100% tariff on Chinese imports, that price becomes $1,999. The iPhone Pro Max, currently $1,399, jumps to $2,798. But here is the problem that nobody in Washington seems to understand. Apple cannot just move production to the United States. It is not a matter of willpower or patriotism. It is a matter of physics and geology. Rare earth magnets required for iPhone speakers and motors. 90% come from China. There are no substitutes. Advanced semiconductors, fabricated by TSMC in Taiwan using Dutch lithography machines and Japanese chemicals. Lithium-ion batteries. 92% of global production capacity is in China, South Korea, and Japan. OLED screens. Samsung in South Korea controls 78% of the market. To make one iPhone entirely in America, you would need to build 14 new factories across 6 states. You would need to train 47,000 workers in advanced manufacturing techniques that do not currently exist in the U.S. labor pool. You would need to secure supply agreements for materials that America does not produce domestically. And you would need 6 years to bring it all online. By then, we will be on the iPhone 25. This is not just about iPhones. This is every product that relies on global supply chains. And in 2026, that is essentially everything. If this analysis is making sense, if you are starting to see the scale of what we are actually facing, hit that like button right now. The algorithm decides what spreads. You decide whether this reaches the people who need to understand what is coming. The markets froze today because they just realized the supply chains that took 40 years to build could collapse in 40 days. There is a document circulating inside the Treasury Department right now. It was leaked to Bloomberg 90 minutes ago. It is marked confidential, and it should be front page news on every outlet in America. But it is not, because what it says is too dangerous to acknowledge publicly. The title is Scenario Analysis, 100% Tariff Implementation. It is an internal assessment prepared by Treasury economists for the Secretary, 23 pages, 3 scenarios, and the numbers should make your blood run cold. Scenario A is what they are calling the best case outcome. GDP contraction of 2.1%. Inflation spikes by 340 basis points. That is 3.4% added to current inflation rates. Job losses estimated at 2.8 million in the first 6 months. That is the best case. The scenario where everything goes smoothly, where consumers absorb the price increases without cutting spending, where businesses do not panic, where foreign governments do not retaliate beyond token measures. Scenario B is what Treasury calls the moderate outcome. GDP contracts 4.7%. That is recession territory. Deep recession. Hyperinflation risk assessed at 8.2% probability. Unemployment hits 11.3%. For context, during the 2008 financial crisis, unemployment peaked at 10%. This is worse. But Scenario C is what keeps Treasury officials awake at night. Complete dollar system collapse. Bank runs in regional institutions that cannot absorb the sudden capital flight. Civil unrest probability rated as high. And here is the line that should shock you. Quote, under Scenario C, Treasury estimates an 18 to 24-month timeline to restore basic economic function. 2 years. They are saying it could take 2 years to rebuild normal economic activity if this goes wrong. There is a footnote on page 17. It is easy to miss, but it says that Scenario C modeling assumes at least one G20 nation experiences sovereign debt default within the first 90 days of implementation. They are expecting a country to go bankrupt. They knew. The people advising the president knew that this policy could break the American economy. They knew it could trigger defaults. They knew it could cause bank runs and civil unrest, and they let him announce it anyway. This was not an impulsive tweet. This was a calculated decision made with full knowledge of the catastrophic risks. The only question now is whether they believe they can control what they just unleashed. There are 3 ways this ends. 3 possible outcomes over the next 18 days before February 15th when these tariffs take effect, and none of them are good. Endgame number 1, the climb down. This is the scenario where Trump blinks first, where the market panic becomes so severe, where the pressure from corporate America becomes so overwhelming, where Republican senators facing midterm elections start breaking ranks so publicly that the White House has no choice but to retreat. In this scenario, Trump announces exemptions, lots of them. He carves out electronics, pharmaceuticals, automotive parts, agricultural equipment. He creates a process for countries to apply for waivers. He declares victory anyway, claiming that the threat alone forced concessions, forced countries back to the negotiating table. The tariffs technically remain on paper but apply to maybe 10% of actual trade volume. He saves face. Markets stabilize. And everyone pretends this was just another round of brinksmanship. Probability of this outcome, 40%. Maybe. But here's the problem. Even if Trump backs down, the damage is done. Trust is broken. Every country that watched this unfold now understands that American economic policy can shift overnight based on a single tweet, that decades of trade relationships can be threatened on a whim, that the rules-based order is not based on rules at all. It is based on whatever the American president decides that day. You cannot unring that bell. You cannot restore the assumption of stability once it has been shattered. Endgame number 2, the fracture. This is the scenario where the tariffs actually take effect on February 15th, where Trump refuses to back down, where he interprets any compromise as weakness and doubles down instead. In this scenario, global trade does not collapse overnight. It fractures. It splits into competing blocks. Countries that continue trading in dollars and maintain access to American markets, and countries that refuse, that pivot to yuan or euro settlements, that accept being frozen out of the U.S. economy in exchange for deeper integration with China, Russia, India, Brazil. The dollar does not lose reserve currency status immediately. It erodes. Over 18 months, over 36 months, as more nations diversify away from dollar dependence, as alternatives like CIPS and BRICS payment systems gain liquidity and legitimacy. Probability of this outcome, 35%. The warning sign to watch for is what happened yesterday. China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa quietly signed a currency swap agreement. No major announcement, no press conference, just a technical financial arrangement that allows them to trade with each other without touching dollars. That is the foundation being laid for a post-dollar trading system. Endgame number 3, the crash. This is the scenario Treasury modeled as Scenario C, where the tariffs trigger panic in emerging markets, where countries with dollar-denominated debt cannot service their obligations because trade collapses and dollars become scarce, where defaults spread like contagion, where the crisis jumps to American regional banks that are heavily exposed to commercial real estate and corporate debt, where the Federal Reserve is forced to choose between saving the dollar's value and saving the domestic economy, where they cannot do both. Probability 25%. The historical parallel is not 2008, it is 1929. Here is how you know this is serious. Here is the tell that insiders are reading the same classified briefings Treasury is writing and they are getting out. SEC filings from the past 7 days show a pattern that should alarm you. 17 members of Congress sold significant holdings in retail and import-dependent stocks between January 20th and January 26th. Before the tweet, before the announcement, before the markets crashed. Total value of these sales, $127 million. And these are not partisan trades. This is both parties, Republicans and Democrats, Senate and House. Names you would recognize from both sides of the aisle dumping exposure to the exact sectors that a 100% tariff would destroy. They knew. While you were watching cable news debates about the latest scandal, they were reading classified economic briefings, and they sold. Insider trading laws technically do not apply to members of Congress when they are acting on information obtained through their official duties. It is legal. It is also a confession. If the people with security clearances, the people who sit in closed-door Intelligence Committee meetings, the people who receive briefings from Treasury and the Federal Reserve, if those people are running for the exits, what does that tell you about what they know is coming? Let me bring this together. 3 things you need to understand. First, this is not about tariffs. This is about weaponizing the dollar itself, about forcing the world to choose between American currency dominance or economic isolation. Second, Treasury's own internal analysis shows catastrophic risk. They modeled scenarios that include sovereign defaults, bank runs, and civil unrest. They knew, and they proceeded anyway. Third, the world is not waiting to see if Trump is serious. They are building alternatives right now. Payment systems, currency swaps, trade blocks that bypass the dollar entirely. Here is what keeps me up at night. Not whether this crashes the economy, but whether the people making these decisions understand what they are breaking, whether they grasp that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. We have 18 days until February 15th. 18 days to see which endgame we are heading toward. Between now and then, watch for 3 signals: more countries joining non-dollar payment systems, corporate earnings warnings as companies admit they cannot absorb these costs, and stress in regional banks that are overexposed to commercial loans. Subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on notifications. Because when the first bank fails, when the first country defaults, when supply chains start snapping, you will not hear about it on mainstream news until it is too late. Share this video. Send it to someone who still thinks tariffs are just negotiation tactics. Send it to someone who believes markets cannot crash. Drop a comment. Do you think we reach February 15th, or does Trump blink first? I will be here, tracking every document, every leak, every signal. Do not get caught on the wrong side of history.